Welcome to today's session, Farming in the Reality, with the generous sponsorship of Comstock Investments. Boy, there's going to be a lot of information that's going to be relevant here today. So it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator and speaker, Marlon Bowling. Marlon, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. All right, everybody, thank you so much for coming in. I'm Marlon Bowling. I took a circuitous route to get here to where I am right now. Some of you may know that I now work with Comstock doing their social media things, such as YouTube, daily podcasts. We put information out every afternoon on that in video form. We also have a radio show that I produce every day. It's 3 minutes long. If your local station doesn't carry it, ask them. Tell them, hey, I'd like to get that Comstock report that Bowling guy does, and maybe they'll check into it, because we're expanding that as we're moving into the social media age. I've been a farm broadcaster for nearly 30 years now. Started out in radio in Kansas, worked my way into TV in Nashville for RFD TV for 10 years. Then about a year and a half ago, I talked with Matthew Cruz and his dad at Comstock, and they wanted some help with some social media stuff. I said, well, I have my own studio, so maybe I can help you with that. And that's what I do. So I farmed myself for 25 years till I couldn't do it anymore, ran out of money. And I told my brother and nephews one time, I said, you know what, I like talking about it more than doing it, so I'll turn it over to you, and maybe it'll help you keep afloat. And I have a feeling some of you may be able to associate with that. So anyway, I thank Matthew. Matthew Cruz is seated next to me here. He is the president of Comstock Investments. They're based in Iowa. Technically, I guess it would be Royal, Iowa, in northwest Iowa. Matthew is from West Des Moines. He is the president, and then next to him we have Karen Braun. She is with Thomson Reuters, and whether you know it or not, Karen has a huge influence on the information that you get. Every time there's a crop report that comes out, for example, Karen is usually credited among us ag journalists with the first information out there, and it's always accurate. She is so precise in the information she puts out. She is a go-to source when it comes to statistics and stuff like that. And then next to her, we have Eric Snodgrass.
I'll do one. I'll do a handstand. How about that?
Yeah, Karen is known for doing handstands on crop tours. Anyway, Eric Snodgrass is with us. And can I officially say where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Might give Eric a hand. He is back as of yesterday,
yeah,
with Nutrient. So anyway, everyone knows Eric as an ag meteorology scientist or something like that.
But you didn't describe me as accurate like you did her, and I have some problems with this. So.
But there's a reason for that. So anyway, we're going to kick things off. Matthew's going to talk for a little bit, and then Karen will talk for a little bit. They all have some slides to show you. Things are crazy right now, and you know that. And the markets are crazy. The news is driving the market minute by minute. In case you're wondering, I'll get you updated here, and I won't keep you very long. When you walked in the room, corn was down 12. Right now, corn is down 5. May corn. May soybeans down 11 right now. They were much lower. They were about 9 cents lower than where they are right now, so they're coming back a little bit. Wheat down 10 to 13. For those of you that have livestock, feeder cattle down 282. I'm sorry. We have the April live cattle up 67. Lean hogs are down $1.97. If you have gold, it's $25 higher right now. That jumped in the last 10 minutes. The Dow, in case you're wondering, is down 700 points. Another day. The U.S. dollar index is currently down 554 points. And all you Bitcoin holders, it's down 870 points today. Yesterday it was down 1,800. Matthew Cruz, president of Comstock, take the stage and walk us through a few things. He's going to talk about South America and the markets.
Well, thank you. Good morning. I usually go by the name Matthew Cruz. Eric told me in his video this morning, he referred to me as Matthew Cruzy, which is fine.
It's too early.
Henceforth, I will refer to him as Eric Snootygrass.
That's fine. My friends call me Snotty. If you want to call me Snotty, I'll take it, but there you go.
But good morning, happy Tariff Day. Here we are. As Trump tweeted this morning, tariffs are on, have fun. That's what he literally said, have fun. So I guess we're going to try and do our best to have fun with it. But so I want to start out talking about the USDA outlook numbers. It kind of started as a placeholder for the season going forward. This is the numbers that they came with. 225 million acres between corn, wheat, beans. So you can see 94 for corn, 84 beans, at 47 wheat. So the one thing that maybe stands out to me is that for the most part, we fluctuate overall between the 220 to 225 million acres. We really aren't obviously adding any more acres. We're kind of at our peak acres. And so it's just what kind of fluctuates between those three principal crops for the most part, which is in stark contrast to what we see happening in other parts of the world. And we'll kind of get into that in a little bit. So this is the balance sheet that the USDA came with last week. And you look at the ending stocks number, it's not a friendly number at 1.965 billion bushels compared to where we're at now, 1.5 billion bushels. But you have to take this with a grain of salt. You know, last year at this time, we were talking 2.1 billion bushels, 2.2 billion bushels, and you know, here we are at 1.5 billion bushels right now. So where did it all go? You know, obviously demand was understated. The crop ended up not being quite as rosy as they thought, and so it kind of seems like we're starting off in that same pattern as last year, to be honest. I mean, it's not hard to poke holes in some of these numbers that they place, you know, 94 million acres for corn. Now, I could see that moving higher yet, but I think a lot of people would contest that yield at 181. It's possible we could get to 181 national yield. It hasn't happened yet. I mean, they are projecting a record crop next year. But when you're expanding, maximizing corn acres as much as they're saying that we're going to, it usually includes those fringe acres that we know don't yield as well. And so it just makes it that much harder to reach that record yield. I wish that the USDA would maybe work with a different type of methodology, because what they do is they start with these high, rosy yields, but the fact is weather has to be damn near perfect over the entire corn belt to get to that. I wish they would start, you know, even if they use last year's number, or use something more modest, and then as the season progresses and we see that things are going well, they can always increase it afterwards. But using this type of methodology, what it does is it kind of artificially depresses prices until we get 7 months later. You wait to the January report, and then they announce, oh, I guess it wasn't all there, and then prices rally, and that's exactly what happened here last year. So, I mean, there's different numbers that we can point out to. My biggest concern, obviously, one of the big outliers is the exports, and what we're seeing happening right now. Now, they trimmed just exports 50 million bushels for next year, you know, based off of these tariffs, and obviously the market reaction today. I mean, that's of great concern to me. I find that really hard to believe that we're going to be able to maintain those levels. You know, the focus historically has just been on China, and it was always about China. And what happened was a lot of that export business shifted to other areas, Mexico being one of them. Well, that's great, but now we're starting to not get along with Mexico and applying tariffs to Mexico as well. And now it becomes a problem because Mexico bought almost 1 billion bushels of corn from us last year. Roughly 40% of our corn exports went to Mexico. And now, you know, we're going to be applying the same tariff pressure to them. So that's my biggest concern right there in the case of demand. Looking at acres, this gives you kind of a comparison between corn acres in the United States and corn acres in Brazil. And you kind of see, for the most part, we plateaued in the United States in our corn acres. And Brazil, on the other hand, has kind of had a slow and steady gain on us. They're at 52 million acres this year. Now, we still outproduce them by about 3 times as much. So we have a pretty big lead on them. But as we'll get into, they have quite a lot more potential for acreage expansion and yield expansion improvement there as well. Again, talking about exports, they've clearly closed the gap between us. They actually did surpass us, took the #1 corn export spot in that 22-23 season. We did reclaim it here again. I think that one positive thing that I think could be positive, they are kind of going through their own corn ethanol boom right now, somewhat similar to what we experienced 25 years ago, and where they have roughly 20 corn ethanol plants online right now. They're talking about another 20 that are in construction. Now, that's somewhat good for us because the more they consume domestically, the less they export. The less they export, there's more that we could potentially sell. That could mean, however, that down the road we might just end up competing with more on ethanol exports with them as well, but that's down the road quite a bit more. One big advantage that we still have is our yield. We still produce great yields overall. Last year's 179.3 was a record yield. Brazil's yields are almost 100 bushels less on average. Now, I compared this to their second crop. The second crop corn is their main crop. They have 3 crops in Brazil. And the second crop represents about 78% of their overall corn production. It's being planted now, just on the tail end. On my family's farm in Brazil, they are harvesting soybeans right now. They're about 25% done, and they're planting that safrinha second crop corn right behind it. So it's always kind of a battle where they don't want too much rain because they need to get the beans out, but they still need some because they need that corn to germinate. But last year on our farm, we got 63 bushels per acre on that safrinha corn crop, and my brother-in-law was content with that. And so just to give you an idea, the cost of production is quite a bit less. It's seen more, in many cases, a rotational crop. But we do still have that advantage in them in terms of yield by quite a bit. This is something that I think is important, that we need to develop these SAF markets and the renewable diesel fuel markets, because it just looks like where the administration is going. I don't think our export market is going to be that reliable going forward. Now, that doesn't have to necessarily be a bad thing. If we can develop our own domestic consumption, maybe we don't need to export anymore to China or other places. The problem is these things take time, and they seem to take forever. And even if we started tomorrow, in this case here, we're talking about by maybe 2030, if we're producing 1 billion gallons of SAF, that's consuming 540 million bushels of corn. Well, that's right there. That's a quarter of our ending stock scenario. And so I wish, I don't have a problem so much as, okay, if we're not going to get along and we're going to tear off the world, but it would have been nice if we had developed these domestic markets first before we kind of blew up the bridge over here. This should be important to us because I've been to a lot of these corn ethanol plants in Brazil, and one in particular, their carbon rating score on one of the first pure corn ethanol plants is 17. Now, the average carbon rating score in an ethanol plant in Iowa is like 50 to 60. And you might ask, well, why should I care about that? Because the buyers in Europe, buyers in places like California, they're going to look to buy that Brazilian ethanol with a lower carbon rating first. And they'll pay more money for it. They don't necessarily care about price. They're willing to bid up for it. And so by establishing, for example, the carbon pipeline and producing SAF, it puts us on level footing with our competitor. And this is something that they're doing now. The carbon rating scores at the sugar mills that produce ethanol that are probably more geared up for export have, I think, a neutral carbon rating. And they're foaming at the mouth to export this and supply the United States with sustainable aviation fuel. Switch over to soybeans, kind of a similar scenario, but the USDA came with a slightly more friendly number, ending stocks at 320 million. And at first glance, that's somewhat positive. But again, I look at they're suggesting we're going to have record exports here at 1.8 billion bushels, and I don't see that happening. I don't, even without the tariffs, I still was skeptical of that. But you could easily drop that down to 1.6 billion bushels with what's going on with China and Mexico and the tariffs, and that's 200 million more that you're going to add to ending stocks. Take you over to 500 million bushels of ending stocks, and at that point you're probably talking sub $10 beans again. This is what acreage has done between the United States and Brazil. You can see their acres in the last, since the year 2000 have expanded over 200%, 227%, and about 16% in that same period in the United States. They surpassed us in that 2018, 2019 year, and they haven't looked back. Their compound growth year over year for the last 20 years is about 5.4%. Now, as commodity prices have been depressed, it's slowed their growth. I think this year was closer to 3%. But even 3% at 117 million, you're still talking, 2 million or more acres a year. And, what tends to happen in the United States when, our margins are depressed, we usually give in first to beans. And I hate seeing that because all that means is we're kind of slowly ceding that market share more and more to Brazil. This is a question that I get asked a lot, is what do we see for further expansion in Brazil? And there's a lot of studies done on this, and there'll be more studies to come, but a lot of these numbers I think I pulled from Embrapa in Brazil. And you see, they talk about there's as much as, without touching anything in Amazon, and that's, a lot of people make the assumption that all this growth is coming from the rainforest, things like that, which isn't necessarily true, although a small part is. Most of it's coming from pasture, converting pasture to row crop production. And there's as many as 80 million acres that they believe could potentially down the road be converted. Now, not all of that's good land. A lot of it's marginal land. So they really say there's many as 40 million acres that could be of high quality land that, on top of that, 117 million soybean acres that could be brought in production. Now, it could take 15 years, 20 years. This isn't going to happen tomorrow. A lot of it's going to depend on prices. If prices are good, they could speed it up and do it faster. If prices are low, it's going to, the expansion is going to slow down. But you kind of see where a lot of that growth is coming. A lot of it's in Mato Grosso in the center-west region of Brazil. But that's all I have for you. I'm going to hand it over here to Marlon.
Okay, for one thing, I want to give Matthew props and kudos. Let's give Matthew a hand. That was kind of tepid. I want you to give him a bigger hand because when you came in, corn was down 12. Now that Matthew spoke, it's down 2.
All right.
Yeah.
I wonder what it'll be when we're done.
So we can either move on or we can have Matthew come back up, whatever you want.
The pressure's on, I
Yeah,
suppose.
pressure's
so.
on.
Dear. Karen Braun, the lovely and gracious Karen Braun of Thomson Reuters. You can stand there, you can stand here, wherever you want to go. But
I'm
she's
going to
got
stand
first.
over here. So I don't know if I can pull off that kind of rally, but we'll see what happens. I was going to promise a handstand if the market is higher after our session, but I don't know. That seems like maybe a little bit risky. Mostly for me. But thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here talking to you guys. I don't actually get a chance to come out and speak in front of a group that much, believe it or not. So it's really nice to be here. And I just want to kind of expand a little bit on what Matt was saying. We were talking about I was told that the headline was farming in the new reality.
Yep, that's right.
So I put new. So this is a new reality. Maybe, I'm not sure if it's permanently new, but let's just say it's changing a lot. And we're feeling that a lot today, especially. So we all know, obviously, tariffs are in place now, went in overnight. And we all can read the news headlines, and there's no need to regurgitate that stuff to you guys because you can read that on your own. But I really just want to emphasize the trade between these countries and why it is important and why we're concerned about this. So these are pie charts of all goods, not just agriculture, but all goods, exports by country. And so you can see for the United States, about 40% of all of its exports go to these 3 countries, Mexico, Canada, and China. But for Mexico and Canada, it's about 75% of their exports go to the United States. And for China, the United States is the #1 destination for exports at about 15%. So you can very easily see why for Mexico and Canada, this is definitely concerning because a very, very big part of their market is obviously the US. So we can look at this for imports as well. And by the way, this is by value. So I'm looking at dollar value, and these are 2022 numbers, but it's pretty comparable to the last few years. So we're looking at where do these countries get their goods from, and for the United States, it's about 40% from these three countries. Mexico and Canada, about 55% from the US, obviously #1 supplier by far. And for China, US is about 7% of all of Chinese imports, but that is competing for top share. So everyone is important for everyone here. You can see exports and imports. And it's important to note on China that soybeans are the #1 US export to China by value. About 10% of all exports were soybeans in 2023. #1 export. Used to be airplanes, but the last few years it's now been soybeans. So maybe this is why China this morning comes in and includes soybeans in its retaliatory measures. So this is looking now just at all agriculture and related goods, and this is actually last year's numbers. And again, about almost half of our exports are going to one of these three countries. And for imports, again, it's about 45%. You got Brazil in there, ironically. I was kind of surprised to see that, but I think that that's interesting just to show you guys. But really, Mexico and Canada, really, really huge. Obviously, Mexico for alcohol, beer, fruits, vegetable, and of course, Canada with canola oil. More than 90% of Canadian canola oil exports go to the US. The US gets a lot of potash fertilizer from Canada. So there's really big ties in the larger picture, and then as well, obviously, with agriculture. But let's not lose the larger picture of the market, okay? So we have the trade drama going on right now, and nobody really knows what's gonna happen with that. It's kind of a day-to-day thing, hour by hour sometimes, we know that. So I want to stay focused on really the larger themes in the market. And this is a chart of global corn stocks to use, excluding China. And as you can see, the USDA forecasts that in 24-25, so later in 2025, we are going to be at the lowest stocks to use level in 29 years at a 7.8%. And this is, this is why we've gotten some excitement in the corn market in the last, really few months, almost a year. And why are we excluding China? Because China is actually scheduled to be holding about 70% of all global stocks, ending stocks this year, and that's a 30-year high as well. So even though they are an importer of corn, the amount of their imports versus their usage, it's still a relatively low percent. So when you have 70% of all the world's corn locked up in China, they're not exporting it. This is why we can exclude China and get kind of an effective global corn stocks to use situation. What's contributing to this? Brazil. So as of 1 month ago, on January 31st, Brazil had its lowest corn supply in over 25 years. They had a stocks to use of about 1.7%. And that was about, I think, 2.1 million tons, so maybe about, if I'm correct, somewhere around 80 million bushels, maybe. So, so that's significant. And Brazil's corn exports are not what they were 2 years ago when they came in and they out-exported the USA. So the low corn stocks in Brazil is definitely part of this larger global story. All right, so speculators obviously have taken notice of this shrinking supply over the last several months. We are now looking at a chart of the managed money net position in Chicago corn and corn futures and options, and this is as of 1 week ago, okay? So this is obviously stale data, but this is the most recent update we have. Last July, they were a record net short, about 350-something thousand contracts net short. They came back up to about 350 recently, and obviously we know that things have changed since last week. Through Monday, I think corn was down about 8%. So this is gonna look different when we see the data on Friday, but just for interest's sake, the largest net selling in a week was exactly 2 years ago in 2023, 150,000 contracts funds pitched that week. So regardless, they still will be net long, But it's just how quickly do you, turn funds back to the bearish side. And all my research suggests that when you get over 300,000 net long for the managed money, position in corn, 6 months later, they are still bullish every single time. But is this year different? It feels like there's some different forces at play. So I'm not sure that that's going to work out this year, but just, they don't just get up to this level for no reason. It's not willy-nilly. They're not gonna change their mind all that quickly. But this will look different. So I will post this on Twitter on Friday. So just talking about the acres really quickly. Matt kind of went through some of the acreage scenarios. USDA has 94 million acres tentatively slated for the U.S. in 2025. And, my analysis does suggest that when you see the set of things that we've seen recently, that number could be even higher when we see the March intentions report at the end of this month. However, there's a limit to the U.S. acres. Principal acres have been declining in the last decade or so, and there's only so many that you can get. And so as you can see with this chart here, back in March of 2020, farmers reported about 319 million acres that they were going to plant with crops to the USDA. Obviously, COVID changed those plans, but we've not really gotten back to that level. And if you're looking for something like 95, 96 million acres of corn, this is going to be a constraint. You have to operate within the available pool of acres. So if it's going to go to corn, you're going to lose soybeans, you're going to lose wheat, you're going to lose cotton. You can't have everything. Something's going to give. So we do have to remember that things have changed in the last few years. So now I just want to end with soybeans, and obviously we're in a different situation with soybeans because our global supplies are pretty plentiful. This is stocks to use at the global level, excluding nobody. And we are, about something like 21%. And outside of that trade war year of 18-19, that's about the highest, about a 14-year high. So we're pretty comfy here in soybeans. And, but still, the market is signaling to the Brazilian producer to continue to expand soybean plantings. Just for interest in the last 12 months, Chicago soybeans are down 12%, more than 12% probably now. But in Brazilian real, it's up 4%. So soybeans are relatively more attractive to Brazilian producers than American producers, and we can't forget the role that currency plays in this. And so I think we all know that Brazil is the top soybean exporter. That's been increasingly so in the last several years. About 58% of all global soybean exports come out of Brazil, and 27% come out of the US. Now, that changed in 2012. So in 2012, Brazil became the top soybean exporter, and they never let up. And I think that what's really important about this slide here is to note that Brazil's takeover of the US as top soybean supplier was happening before the first trade war. It was already happening. And in my opinion, I think that string of crop shortfalls between 2010 and 2012 here in the US, that really invited people to come to the table. It really expanded the global export market, and that's true in corn as well. So just note that this was already kind of in progress, but obviously the trade war didn't help situation. And finally, I want to end with kind of a longer-term thought, because Brazil has increased its soybean planting area for 18 consecutive years now. I don't know if there's a streak that is comparable anywhere. I think this is pretty unprecedented. 18 years. And so in those 18 years, Brazilian soybean plantings have increased by 130%. And in those 18 years, Chinese soybean demand has increased 175%. So that's still good, right? But overall, total global soybean consumption is only up 80%. So you see that this expansion in Brazil is heavily relying on China. More than 70% of Brazilian soybean exports go to China. And so this is potentially a risk. I mean, when you have one customer, one primary customer, and you're relying this heavily on one customer, this is where a longer term risk lies. Now, you've seen Chinese population decline for a third consecutive year. You've seen shrinking growth in their economy, and that's projected to continue the next few years at least. We've been hearing reports that their pork production has stabilized, pork consumption has stabilized. They don't see a bunch of growth for demand there, and that's why they import soybeans, is to feed the hogs. So at some point, is the Brazilian soybean expansion going to go too far? And when is that going to be? Currently, the economics are telling them to do it. But at some point, and I think in the US, we realized this in 2017-18, we started overproducing soybeans and thinking that Chinese demand was kind of endless. That was not the case. And then the trade war obviously did not help. But we were already on our way to this situation. And someday Brazil might have that reckoning. I'm not sure how soon that's going to happen, but this is really a longer term risk for Brazil, and especially relying on an economy like China. So that's all I have for now.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, let's see how she did.
Oh, it's fine. I want to know what the markets did.
Matthew Corn gained 10 cents while you were up here on
Okay.
stage, and so Karen, your grade is right now we're down 5. You lost 3
okay.
cents. I'm sorry, but
What can I say?
however, beans are still roughly down
Good luck,
about
Eric.
10.
Yeah.
So anyway, we'll try not to hold her to it. So watch for Karen's stuff on Twitter. She's a prolific tweeter.
So
and,
then no handstand. Right now we're on no handstand.
no handstands as
All the
of
mar-
yet.
the
There's
market-
still time. So
market's
now it's
saying
time
no.
for Eric Snodgrass, or do we go by Snodgrass? Or-
Whatever you want to call me.
Here is your token,
All
your
right.
clicker thingy, and Eric, the stage is yours.
So listen, before I get started, something you mentioned at the end, Karen, this is interesting. This past summer, I got to meet with a couple different groups of Brazilian growers. They came up to Loyola University in Chicago, and we sat down and just chatted about some of these things going on here, because I think it's very important that we see their relationship ties with China. Now, this is not my area of expertise, but I am a giant nerd, so I do look at these things. So I just want you to think of a few things about what we deal with in South America, and I want you to see the sheer size of U.S. states overlaid with some of the Brazilian and Argentinian growing areas. It's absolutely enormous. And Matt gave you a number of 80 million acres. There was another study that was done on what they could possibly expand over that got Landsat data. This was released in 2021, and it said if you looked at everything that is not rainforest and not where somebody lives, there's actually 400 million acres that are available. Now, that doesn't mean you get to put all that into production. The realistic number is 80 million, and if you talk to the Brazilian growers, they think that if demand is still in place, this is just them telling me that they will put in 40 million acres over the next decade to 15 years. But Karen brought up a really important point about China's population. So she mentioned the population decline. We do think demographically that they're past peak. Something to think about, though, is if you know how many people are in the United States, there's 340 million of us, okay, in the US. In China, there's 388 million people that are over the age of 55. So what we're trying to assess and understand is what do their spending habits look like? Where does that wealth go? What does the transition look like? And those are all questions that they can answer, but I just wanted to bring up some of that information just to kind of top off these two topics here. But I think you can all collectively want me to tell you something extreme. I think that's the thing that I've been told. Could you please make massive drought, just not where I am, or flood everybody out so that we can get some sort of shock in the system? And I want to be very clear about something with the three of us that are up on stage here. We are not clairvoyant. If we were, we don't come to Denver and tell you about it. Like, are you clear? Are we clear on that? Like, if we knew, Karen and I would be in Chicago still. We'd be at the Board of Trade, we'd sell everything we own, and we would retire in June, multi-billionaires, okay? But no, we decided to come down here and speculate and tell you what we think we know. We probably would have brought Matt along the way. He probably could help us execute the trade, okay? But the reality is simply this. We have these ideas and these boxes that get checked that help us deliver a story to you. And the one thing that we are very good at is, in the light of evidence, we pivot our story fast. And we want you to see what that looks like as it comes. So am I going to tell you that I think there's drought risk in the central United States for 2025? Yes. Can I be wrong? Absolutely. And I will tell you how I can fail on this very, very easily. But I think all of you collectively right now, at least if I look around the audience, I don't see any Brazilians. If I could identify you, you wish that this would have the problem right now. These huge acres of corn and soybeans, we'd like to see some sort of an issue. We thought it might be in the harvest pace or the planting pace of the safrinha corn or the harvest of the current first crop of soybeans, but honestly, they caught back up to the 5-year averages, and now we're just looking to see if there's going to be some sort of an issue. So I try to label a couple of things to keep an eye on here. One, where's the biggest drought been so far? It's been in Paraguay or northern Argentina. These are not highly productive acres. They had timely rains that got through Cordoba, which is down in Argentina, and also into Buenos Aires lately. That helped with some of the mid to late planted crop there. And then if you look right in the middle where you see some dryness around Mato Grosso, which is an absolutely huge state, dryness there is not like dryness for us. If they only get 3 inches of rain this week, they're still growing plenty of crop, even though that can be 1 inch below their average. Sometimes in the middle of the season, they'll get 4 inches of rain a week. What I want you to look at is the big oval that's on the right-hand side. We think about maybe 15 to 20% of the safrinha corn acres are inside of that, in Bahia, or in Goiás, Tocantins, or Minas Gerais. And if that area continues to see some drought pressure, well, we could hit the eastern side of the growing area. You look back historically at the data over here on the left of their yield and their production and acreage. You've already seen these numbers from the other two. But I want to know what pushed them down. And it's pretty hard to find major weather problems hit Mato Grosso, their biggest producing places. But to the east, they can sometimes get yield-robbing drought scenarios. And honestly, the next 14 days, I need to see this repeat 5 weeks from now. And what is it? If you look, you see that eastern growing area. It's actually encroaching a bit on the center-west, but it's still forecast to be drier than average, especially over the next 7 days, but even into week 2. And if that same dryness and heat comes back in about 5 weeks, it's this critical time period of grain fill. And if that occurs, that'll also be at the same time that many of you are trying to put a crop in the ground here. And the compounding of these two news events could be on a supply side story. But I've got to have it come back in 5 weeks. You say, well, Eric, tell me what's going to happen in 5 weeks. And I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen in 5 weeks. If I did, again, I'm not here. But we can look at it and start to see some of these things take shape, because history would tell me to tell you that if we see the subtropical high that lives off the coast of Brazil move where you see that white H, okay, this is the white H right there, then we start to push dryness and heat at the wrong time of the year. And what it tends to do is it starts to shut off the monsoon a bit early. Now, I promise you, at any point, you can go out and find a weather model that'll tell you exactly what you want to hear. They're all over the place. I see people do this all the time. They get real selective on whatever news information they want to follow their story. And yes, we do have some longer-term information that would suggest that the end of the Brazilian monsoon has been getting a bit sooner. You go back to 1940 to present and say how much rain's fallen in April, May, and June, and we notice that the trend is down about 7 inches. I know it's written kind of small down there, but it's about a 7-inch loss. So here's the combination of events. If you would like to get something supply newsworthy out of Brazil, the pattern we're in right now, have it come back in 5 weeks. Because then after that, the monsoon typically slows down anyway, which means the crop is going to finish under some drier conditions. Don't bank on it. Just know what needs to take place for that to be some sort of a weather story about the time we're getting all of the information on the numbers that they've been discussing. That's what I know about South America. In North America, this was pretty nuts last night. I don't know how many of you are from Texas, but take a look at the animation. You can see a massive dust storm that left New Mexico into Texas. And I saw some pictures from the National Weather Service last night that were just incredible to see that dust. I am worried about drought because of where it is right now. What's the number one thing we've learned about drought since we've been studying it? Drought begets drought. Something big has to come along and break it. And we're wondering if that's going to happen in March or in April to get me to stop talking about it. So I'm going to give you a number, and then I'm going to wrap this up, and we'll get to some questions, okay? What's the number? If you would like to know what I think for the central United States, and that includes all of these central U.S. states from Colorado, then straight up and down the plains, all the way to Missouri and Iowa, let's call that the central U.S., there is currently, based off historical statistical evidence, a 6 in 10 chance that we build drought in that area going through summer. That also means there's a 4 in 10 chance we don't. Are we clear on this? Don't screw up the statistics. I don't know about you guys, but this drives me nuts. I said 60%, and all of you go, oh, yes, there's going to be drought. No, not. It's a 60% chance, okay? So we just see these things and start to worry about them. So let me give you a few slides to consider here. Maybe you can see the one that's tucked away in the bottom right. What you're looking at there is different crops according to the drought monitor, how much land area is currently in drought. I'm looking at those corn acres, and what is it? It's 56%. That's in some form of drought. We've got 2/3 of the country in some form of drought. And we just wonder what this picture is going to look like going forward. And don't forget that drought extends into Mexico. And we think back to years where drought has moved from Mexico through the southwest into the southern plains. And a year to toss out is 2011. That's one year that occurred. We then say, well, we can't forget that last fall we were incredibly dry. August through September and October was bone dry, so much so that NASA's soil moisture product found that the top 16 inches of the soil was the driest in their record keeping. And when that drought lives in the soil, if winter doesn't come along and kind of knock it out, well, we know something, and that is this. Today, if I go down farther than 16 inches, go down to 40, we still see that parts of the Dakotas, Nebraska, Iowa, northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin, northern Indiana, Michigan, still have very low subsurface soil moisture, according to NASA's data. And you all know there's a massive winter storm going through right now, right? How many of you are from Iowa? You all know you have a blizzard warning. You're not going home tonight. So just chill out and stay another day, enjoy Denver. But the thing is, you still have a frost line, unfortunately, that's down there about 9 to 10 inches. So all this water that's coming in isn't going to cure this long-standing problem of our drier soils beneath. The rivers always tell you what's going on. And in St. Louis, after the Missouri and the upper Mississippi come together, in St. Louis, the river this morning was 1 foot below low stage. Whereas in Memphis, after the Ohio comes in, which is where there's been a bunch of flooding, we have the river there that's come up 35 feet just in the last 3 weeks. So what's the point of all of this? Well, does fall drought mean anything? 6 in 10 years where we have drought like we had in fall, May to August temperature and precipitation patterns look like what you see here. No, you might take the colors and all of a sudden turn them into like, oh my gosh, look how dry it is. No, 4 inches over those months. Okay, there's going to be pockets of issues, but we have to pay attention to this. It's the heat that I'm concerned about. You say, well, what about La Nina? Why aren't you talking more about it? It's because too many people put too much emphasis on La Nina. La Nina is a winter factor. In summer, it fades. But we do know something about fading La Ninas. And fading La Ninas often produce this expanding drier risk that runs from Texas to Wisconsin back to North Dakota. They tend to produce heat in the northern plains. I just said tend to. I didn't say guarantee that this happens. And now some of you are checking to see if your concealed carry is loaded because you'd like to shoot me off the stage because you live here. And I'm just going to say, hang on a second. I need you to remember 4 in 10 times we get this wrong. But I can't argue against this map, which comes from Iowa State. That's what we've seen in terms of precipitation ranks by climate district since December 1. The closer you are to the number 133, that would be the driest on our records. Let's go back to 1893. You can very easily identify a wet corridor. We call it eastern Texas through Arkansas, through the Mid-South, getting Kentucky, Tennessee. And we're still flooding in Kentucky right now from the rains 2 weeks ago. But there's pockets, large pockets that have missed out on moisture this winter and snow. So you better believe I'm rooting for the big snowfall event to go through Iowa because most of the upper Midwest is deficit. Now, most of the upper Midwest, northern plains, bring a snow drought on. I love it. I love it for my cow-calf operation. I don't want snow, but you do want it late March because you get to keep that water. So it is kind of nice to see this. This is this morning's yesterday's European model run. You've got snow coming. Like I told you, you're not going to get home later today. It's going to be gross in the Midwest. And this system's going to rip through and also drag in some moisture. But our eyes on maps like this just tend to gravitate to the areas that are super wet. And you miss what I'm going to show you on this map. These are the places that stay dry through this. So what I'm concerned about is if these places don't recover, the southern plains, pockets of the Canadian prairie, the northern plains back to Montana, and then Mexico, does this fill in and spread by the time we get into summer? So to get to the end of this, here you go. This was just released this morning. That is the brand new March 15 to April 15 outlook. Eastern Corn Belt, Mid-South, Northeast, continue to see an active pattern. Will we be mudding in a crop? Maybe some of you will. But look at the plains. I need massive storm systems to slow down and spin over the panhandles. We have a name for them. I don't know if you remember this, Karen, but we call them panhandle hookers. We need a few panhandle hookers to hang out and just spin there. Now, some of you are finally cluing in on what I just said. But anyway, we need them to sit, they hook south and then turn north. Well, we just need them to sit there and hit that region. But one of the biggest tests I have right now on the spring forecast are all of these storm chasers, which you love to follow on social media. Y'all know Reed Timmer? That dude put out his spring forecast. You know where he's planning to chase? Inside of that oval. He's not planning many trips out to the plains. If he's storm chasing in the southeast, that means we could be dealing with infrequent storms in the plains, possibly. I need Reed Timmer and Jim Cantori to be in Hays, Kansas. And if they are there, everything I just told you is out the window. Spring can undo all of winter's sins, and it can undo it in a heartbeat, and we are waiting to see if this is going to be the case. But I cannot find you a model forecast that looks something different from this. That's March, April, May from NOAA and the U.S. government. Let me show you the last couple things here. That's their newest drought outlook. I'll point on the screen that's over here to my left. But all of this just filled in with drought risk increasing in their latest update. And these people are good at their jobs. And so as you look at that, that's what we're concerned about. And lastly, we're just going to look at these graphics all lined up. I'm going to show you two different modeling suites. Are these models good? They're okay. But as you look at them, your eye is drawn to where it's wet and where it's dry. And you can see the progression of months. They're labeled down there in the bottom. And you notice that this suite of models we run in North America continue to show this dryness spreading through the plains. Is it drought? No. But is it dryness? Yes. And the Europeans seem to think the same thing. Sorry, my transitions are a bit out here, but they kind of see the same sequence of events. So back to evidence, right? That's all we presented to you today. If we see evidence of this continuing, there is going to be a story that is going to push things around in a big way. This could all crumble in a heartbeat if March punches above its weight class. You know what I've been wishing for? 7 systems like the one that's today by the time we get to the end of March. And then I'd like an April 4th blizzard. Nobody wants that until you get to May. And you're like, man, that April 4th blizzard was awesome. I got all the water out of that, and we're no longer freaking out about drought. That's what I want for all of you. So we've now thoroughly angered you. What did the markets do for me? I'd like to know. Because I can't do a handstand. I maybe do a somersault, but please tell me. I'm curious here.
All right, the score for Eric is we are still down 5, so
Okay.
you tied with Karen. Matthew is the clear winner here today.
All right.
So, anyway, let's give Eric a hand. I know we're running a little late, so we'll kind of do a rapid fire question and answer here. So if you got some questions, no matter what it's based on, grab a microphone. There's one there and there's one there. And in the meantime, we'll chat here for just a little bit. We've got about 10 minutes to fill. So, all right, Eric, that map that you were showing about all the dryness in the plains.
Yeah.
We just had a $1 sell-off in corn, didn't we, or 80 or 90 cents? I mean, does that tell you that the deferred months are maybe looking a little promising? I'll let you and Matthew hammer this one out for a little bit.
I don't know that the two are necessarily fully correlated right now, but I don't know. I could not tell you what moves the market any given day. I'm always
Matthew-
surprised. So Matthew, let's pass it on.
As I was sitting here looking at this, I haven't locked in my crop insurance yet, and I was debating whether I should get the ECO, which takes it up to 95% coverage, which would, I think, just about cover my cost of production. And I'm watching this, I'm like, yeah, I think I'm going to do it.
You got to hope that that model's right. Because that model's not right, I still have a job. So that's something to think about.
I think we have a question from the floor. Go ahead. Now, give us your first name and where you're from.
Chad from southeast Nebraska.
All right.
We talk about losing or them gaining 40 million acres of row crop in Brazil. What does that do to livestock production down there?
What
So he
does that do
said
to what?
40 million acre gain in Brazil. What does it do to livestock in Brazil, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
I don't know that it changes it all that much, because what happens is all that pasture tends to, a lot of times, move to confinement. And so there's not a lot of confinement in Brazil, but it is increasing. And so would not probably be a fair assumption that to think that livestock production would decrease just because the row crop goes away. But they have so much potential there, unfortunately, as well, where they have 225 million head of cattle, but it's all pasture, most primarily, not all, but primarily pasture. And so by moving it to confinement, even if they had less cattle, they could just be way more efficient and still produce the same amount of meat.
Did that answer your question? All right, thanks for the question. I think we may have another one coming here. Karen, I wanted to ask you, we had the big Ag Outlook Forum the other day in Arlington, Virginia, just outside of D.C. How often are those acreage estimates accurate when we get into like March 31st?
It's been really tough to kind of gauge this. The last several years we've had weird events. Like we had the really wet spring in 2019, we had COVID in 2020, and then 2021 trying to recover from the pandemic and figure out the new normal. So it's really hard to say. The last couple of years have been, or last few years have been quite different. But like I said in my presentation, the numbers right now would suggest that you would get a higher planting intention number than the 94. But again, prices are still high for inputs. And while corn looks way better than soybeans right now on paper, it's still not looking great. And you have the restriction of the total universe of acres. So, is this a year where it's different and you don't see that big gain in corn acres? But you definitely can see a rise into March. And then the June acreage number tends to be the highest of the ones. You usually see a rise in March to June, unless you have a bad spring.
Okay, I think we have a question over here first. Give us your first name and where you're from.
Rod Bigham, Northeast Kansas. This is for Eric. Do you agree with Ellen Taylor's assessment and what Comstock's been promoting the last couple of years that 2025 is going to be the drought of the century?
Yeah, I wish Elwin were in front row here. Elwin's an incredible scientist, meteorologist. I do not place weight on solar cycle and variability simply because a historical analysis of trying to correlate solar cycles to temperature and precipitation often yields very tiny correlations. So I also don't think that the atmosphere has an 89-year memory to it, where it's like, hey, we got him in 36, let's get him in 25. So we have to take that out of our heads. There's a lot of folks that will tell me we're due, and I'm just like, well, what about all the drought periods in between that we've endured, right? We cannot forget those things. I would give you an entirely different explanation as to why the drought risk is elevated this year, and it doesn't include at all anything to do with solar flux and solar cycles. And back in 1847 and 1936, the peak in their solar cycles during that is actually significantly higher than it is this year. So we're not going to look at those and say that that this one's on par with that. I will make a comment, and this is not a criticism, but Elwin's work, which is incredibly important, didn't make it through the peer review process. I don't know that he tried to do that. So I can't actually go find peer-reviewed literature that would support this. So long story short, my entire reasoning about worrying about drought is not based upon the 89-year Gleisberg cycle, because I find such small correlations between solar fluctuations and temperature and precipitation patterns. But I wish Elwin was here. Really, I do, in talking about it, because if you listen to what he actually said, we've interpreted it that 2025 is going to be the year, but he actually said that 23 through 26, highly variable year to year, based on his research, and that I'm 100% in agreement with.
But we are showing dryness in the plains.
Yes.
So stay tuned. Got another question. I know we're needing to wrap up. Go ahead. Give us your first name and where you're from.
Hi, my name's Ted. I'm from Chicago, Illinois. And speaking of the Ag Outlook, they had 316 million acres in principal acreage. It's a little bit higher than what we've seen in previous years. Is that number a realistic number? And could it possibly be changing considering what's happened in the last week or so with markets?
Matthew.
I missed part of that. 360 million acres?
316 million principal acres is what the World Ag Board just said for our next growing season. That's a little bit higher than what we've been seeing in the last couple of years. Do we think that number is realistic, or do we think it's high? do we think anything's changed in the last week and a half or 10 days with how markets have been trading?
You're talking about all combined
Yeah,
acres?
all combined acres. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to find anything that makes money right now. And so it's hard for me to believe that we're going to find more acres overall. You know, I'd have to. I didn't go through each line item by line item, but I was talking to a guy the other day. You know, cotton is a good example. Cotton production is not fun right now. You know, and that's another market that Brazil is slowly eating into ours. And I talked to cotton producers that said, you know, the writing's kind of on the wall that cotton production is just going to go away. And I said, well, what are they going to do? Well, a lot of people in Alabama or Georgia are going to plant peanuts, you know, and so they're looking for anything right now that works, that makes money. You know, so that would be my 2 cents.
Yeah. Well, Matt was showing the outlook numbers that was the 225 million combined corn, soybean, and wheat acres for 2025 in the U.S. And I went through that analysis, and interestingly, it has been 8 years since USDA's February forecast of corn plus soybean plus wheat acres in the U.S. Actually was realized. Every single year for the past 7 years, that combined acreage has been lower. And there are reasons, obviously 2019, 2020, that we can explain that easily. But again, I think that kind of trend speaks to that disappearance of available acres. So really, if anything, the trend does lean downward on that combined acreage forecast that USDA puts out this early.
Yeah, I mean, you can point to a lot of things, urban expansion and the solar panel expansion, all that type of thing. So I think the trend is clear that, you know, like you see numbers that we lose 500,000 acres a year or more.
I moderated a conference in Des Moines last week, and I'll ask you folks too. Same thing I asked that crowd. How many in here raise corn or grow corn? Raise your hand up high. All right, how many of you have sold at least half of last year's corn? Raise your hands. Really? Half? How about 3/4, 75%? Is that right, really? Matthew, what do you think about that?
Yeah, that looks smart today, doesn't it?
Wow.
I think we did pretty good. Going into this in January report, we still had a third of our old crop left that we got sold at these higher levels. Our last sale, we got $5 cash. I guess we would recommend in these risky. I mean, it's so hard to predict, right? Like we're not clairvoyant. It's hard to predict what's the outcome of these tariffs. But chances are it's probably not good. And so, we advise our producers to get smaller. For new crop already, we sold some calls, and a lot of people buy 480 puts, which they're extremely happy today. I don't want to be all doom and gloom. There are reasons, like Karen talked about with global corn stocks, weather, things like that. So I wouldn't, go out and sell everything today, especially at these levels. So there's reasons to be optimistic, but you just when the opportunity comes and we get a rally, you got to reward that rally. You got to make those sales, and so that's unfortunately where we're at now.
All right, we have one more question here on the left side here.
My name's Kyle from Glencoe, Minnesota. Just a quick question on corn. How do you think the Mexico banning GMO corn is going to affect our exports? Because they buy $5 billion worth of corn every year just for animal use. And just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's been something that's going on, that has been going on for the past several years. And I know that recently they decided they were not going to ban the import of GM corn, but now they're wanting to put that in their law that they cannot plant the seeds. It's really hard to say with things such in flux right now, but I would say that really Mexico's corn crop in general has expanded at a very low rate compared with what its corn consumption, how its corn consumption has grown, over the last decade. So either way, I mean, they're going to be reliant on imports if they're going to continue to grow their demand the way that they have. So I think that the concern really is that that's another way to sort of ban U.S. imports, or at least limit or threaten them. And I don't know that with the trade rules, how the U.S. won that argument against Mexico, and that was resolved. I don't know if this is another attempt at that, but that's going to be difficult for them to accomplish officially. So.
Yeah, I mean, the real challenge with these tariffs is the repercussions can last years or even decades, depending on how long they stay enacted. And we were talking yesterday about the wheat embargo back in the 1980s that we placed on with Russia, and at that time, I mean, we were the king of wheat production. Russia didn't have wheat. They were sourcing it, buying it from us, and I heard that flash forward 40 years. That situation is reversed. Well, what happened? Yeah, it temporarily placed some pain on Russia at that time, but they saw it as a national security issue. They started developing their own domestic production, sourcing it from alternative locations. And I heard that argument a lot from people in the first kind of trade wars with China, is all they need are beans. There's nothing they can do about it. Well, maybe at that time, but I mean, they're not dumb. They see it as, they're using food as a weapon. So let's start developing other protein sources. Let's develop other alternative locations. Bada bing, bada boom, 20 years later, the scenario has changed. But all those people that made those decisions 20 years ago, 40 years ago, they're no longer around, and everyone just accepts this as a new reality. The unfortunate situation is that U.S. wheat is the residual supplier to the world. They seek it from other places first, like Russia or Ukraine. Why is that? Everyone just accepted as that's how it is today. But it's not how it used to be. And that's my concern is, you don't know what's going to happen. 20 years ago, Brazil was a net importer of corn. They had to buy corn because they didn't have enough. And now in 20 years, they took the #1 export spot. And so you don't want to make these assumptions that, it's that way today, it'll be that way tomorrow. And so that's my concern, is a lot of stuff that's happening, the repercussions could last forever, and it won't come back because, we've broken that trust. If we use food as a weapon today, who's to say we won't do it tomorrow?
Well, anyway, thank you for your participation today. We really enjoyed having everybody come out. A big hand for the crew here, and if you look on the screen, Eric Snodgrass is actually back with Nutrien again. Karen Braun, you can find her on Twitter. She is with Reuters. Matthew Cruz, of course, he and I do podcasts once in a while each week talking about South America. If you want to know what the markets are doing right now, I know things are crazy. Matthew is in booth 1821 in the exhibit hall. If you want to see what the markets are doing, he has a big monitor up there, and he and Justin McKinney can show you what's going on. But it was great to see you all come out. Thank you for all the support. In case you're wondering, right now corn's down 6, beans are down 13, wheat's down 12 to 15, and that's the best I can do for you right now. But anyway,
That's
I
right.
wish you
The
guys
audience
well.
failed.
I hope you have a great year. Thank you for joining us.
right.
Appreciate it.
Futures trading involves risk. The risk of loss in trading futures and/or options is substantial, and each investor and/or trader must consider whether this is a suitable investment. Past performance is not indicative of future results.